liberty of chairing this meeting by asking the first questions, but you can get your questions ready. If you pass them to the side aisles, we will pick them up. Let me start with Ms. Eisenberg. I have some questions about the judge. What kinds of questions he asked? What particularly interested him or gave him reason to pause?
So I will say the judge plays his cards very close to his vest. It has been very difficult for us to glean from his questioning in court where he is going. One question that I thought was very interesting was that he pointed out that City College was not a party to our case. As I believe most of you understand, the City Attorney's Office doesn't represent City College. We filed this case on behalf of the people of the state of California, who we have the right to represent in court. But so City College itself has never been a party. And the judge pointed out that there was something a little bit awkward for him about that. And how can he give us this remedy that we're seeking and ask the ACCJC to go back, vacate its decisions, and reevaluate City College when we don't know how City College feels about that? And I think the judge was struggling a little bit with how to come to terms with City College's absence from the table, and which we were prepared for because we had wonderful deposition testimony. We had deposition testimony from the special trustee, Robert Agrella, who had been asked in deposition about the restoration process that Tim Killikelly just spoke about. And well, aren't you already getting this new evaluation? Aren't you getting everything you need out of restoration? And Special Trustee Agrella said, well, no, we would much prefer not to have this restoration process and to have a new comprehensive evaluation of the school in the same way as every other institution. And as I was reading this testimony from Mr. Agrella, the judge was nodding his head. That's the one thing I remember very clearly from the argument was the judge going, oh, and writing down the site. So I think he took some comfort from that. And the other moments I remember of his questioning, and perhaps I'm remembering his questioning through rose-colored glasses, but what I also recall is him asking questions of the other side that he would say, well, I don't think you're representing the people's position. I think the people's position is X. And he would restate something that I had said, and I was nodding. Yes, that's our position, and the judge gets it. So I think whatever happens, what I took away from the argument was that the judge does understand our positions. He has read our papers. He understands what we're saying. What he does with that, we'll have to wait and see, but I feel confident that he has absorbed and understands what it is that we're trying to argue.
So, regardless of what's the ACCJC takes as its decision come January or February, the injunction stays in place until the decision is rendered by the judge.
That's correct. So our preliminary injunction remains in place until we get a final decision in our case. So if the restoration decision is made before there's a final decision, and if it is not a good restoration decision, the school still could not be terminated pending a final decision in our case.
So when you brought up the issue of Barbara Bino having received the document that she then edited to say things that were basically the opposite of what the reviewing panel had recommended, did the judge take note of that?
Yes, there was a lot of testimony on this point that we put up on the screen during the case, the original draft and the final draft, and some of Barbara Bino's edits, taking out really positive things that were said about the steps that the college had taken to address issues that had been raised by the ACCJC, that the school had been enthusiastic and taken compelling action, and I thought it was dramatic testimony that the court noted, the audience noted, and that I think was very compelling.
Does the judge have the authority to review the restoration process at all?
Not per se, not as a process. The ACCJC has essentially argued that because of the restoration process, there is no need for the court to do anything further for City College, and so there was a fair amount of discussion about restoration in that context, and of us trying to explain why that is not so. Why, for all of the reasons that Tim went through before, restoration is not sufficient, And so the remedy that we are seeking for City College is still necessary. So he likely will have to think about restoration and how it impacts the case, but he doesn't have the authority to independently look at restoration, if that makes sense.
So Tim, you referenced for part of your testimony the 80% of revenues that goes for faculty and instruction, and how, or I guess it's close to 86% here at...
the last numbers that I saw about City College was, I think it was 86.4, I'm not exactly sure. I think that's it. And the statewide average is now about 84%. And furthermore, urban districts tend to have a little bit higher rate. So we're an urban district, so we're really consistent in terms of the finances. And I think also, another thing I'd like to point out about this is when they disaccredited us in 2013, you know, the special trustee who had been who was before he was the special trustee with extraordinary powers, he had never changed any decision that the Board of Trustees made. So the idea that somehow we're so out of compliance, it just doesn't, the reality doesn't match that argument.
So you kind of anticipated my question somewhat. Is there an adjustment for high costs for urban settings for community colleges? Because, you know, the community college in Butte can offer a much different salary than the community college here in San Francisco. And I would think that is something that should be
so there is no standard that says a particular number. There's no standard that says that. So the only adjustment that seems to have been made is that we're City College and they're going to apply the rules in an arbitrary way because they didn't like some of the things we were doing, more than it had anything to do with some kind of standard they have, because there were places where it had even higher than City College during different years. And like I said, it was not even mentioned in some team reports. So there's just this arbitrariness to this that really sticks out, and it's quite disturbing.
So, Chancellor Galatolo, what is the revenue, the use of revenues for faculty and instruction at community colleges in San Mateo County?
So our number is actually higher than that. We're probably, well, it's all salaries. It's in the mid to high 80%. Mid to high 80%.
So not at all different from...
Oh, no. Actually, I think we might even be a little higher than city, actually, in that regard. So, no, it's very unfortunate, the circumstance that they would use. It's not uncommon for that amount of money to use. I mean, come on, we're basically a service organization. You know, we invest heavily in the faculty and staff that drive the student learning. And so as a result, we recognize that's where our primary expenditure is going to be. And we proudly do that. And up and down the state, most institutions do that. That's how you attract the best and the brightest and retain the best and the brightest.
So this question is open to anyone on the panel. My understanding is that the Board of Trustees for the community colleges will be in their December meeting actually taking action on whether or not to open up the accreditation to other than the ACCJC. And does anyone know when that's going to happen?
Well, let me kind of jump in here. And before I answer that question, I after Tim said something, I really have to talk about actually how arbitrary this really is. And I apologize for getting tangential just for a second, but it really will drive home that it cuts both ways. I said a year ago that if you were a community college up and down the state, the chances of you being sanctioned was probably around 67%. By the way, the national average was about 2%, but that was not a concern of the ACJC at that time. But what was, actually more concerning is when I was doing work with the city attorney and was able to look at some documents. And although this did not really tie into the case at all, I was going through this litany of documents, and one of the reviews I went through was the current president of the commission, Steve Kinsella, at Gavilan College. I went through his recent accreditation, and it was the most mind-blowing epiphany I've ever seen when I read through this. So when you go through and you look at these reports, constantly argue the 2-year rule. That if you have not made a change from your last review 6 years ago, which was far more than 2 years, they had no choice but to sanction you. That's why they're at 67% sanction, is when they looked at the report before and you failed to achieve one of those findings, that you would be automatically sanctioned. And time again, they were very consistent on that. They used that 2-year rule as a consistent hammer. But what I found to be the most egregious thing I saw in going through these reviews is that Gavilan College, the peer evaluating team went out to Gavilan College and identified that Gavilan College had failed to meet its student learning outcomes 6 years earlier. Matter of fact, did a poor job. The percentages were considerably lower than many of the other colleges. And I thought, well, there you go. Automatic sanction. There has not been one exception. When you talk about editing the action letters and editing the reports, the action letter that came out from the AACCJC was completely silent on what the peer evaluating team identified as a clear violation, as a clear failure to meet that standard. And it was completely left out of the action letter report, and they reaffirmed accreditation. It was the only exception I ever found looking through every report. So I don't think that she was willing to put the president of her commission on sanction. That's really what it boils down to. And if you remember a year ago, I told you that if you were a commissioner, you didn't get sanctioned. You were not part of that 67%. As a matter of fact, there were 20 reviews by the commissioners during that time period I was telling you about, and only one, East LA, was sanctioned, and they were immediately taken off the next 6-month term. So it does benefit to be a commissioner, I guess. Now, getting back to your question, Congresswoman Spear, this was an issue that we focused on many years ago. It was literally written into Title V that the AACCJC was the only body recognized to accredit community colleges. And I thought, this is kind of crazy. First and foremost, throughout the rest of the nation, there is no 2-year accrediting body. There is none. The AACCJC was formed for 2 years and 2 years only. Now their argument has been, we're so large, we have 113 colleges, need to have one. Well, I hate to tell you this, but when you look at the community colleges that are in those other bodies throughout the rest of the nation, there's considerably more than 113 community colleges that are in those 4-year accrediting agencies that do that work. And our 4-year is WASC. The irony is WASC does the 4-year, so it does the universities at CSU and UC, and it also does the K-12. So you go WASC K-12, then you go to AACCJC for 2 years, and then you go back to WASC. It's illogical. It makes no sense. And we've been fighting that battle with the Chancellor's office and the Board of Governors saying, why would you, one, identify and isolate just one body? Seems like a monopoly to me. And number two, why would we break ranks here? Why wouldn't we just have WASC be the accrediting body for all public education in California, like it's done in the other regions throughout the rest of the United States? Really no answer, and this is really a question for the DOE. Well, they've kind of come full circle, and they realize, and their argument isn't because AACCJC shouldn't belong, it's more about that they realize that it's really inappropriate in Title V to name a non-governmental organization in those regulations, that it really is a very awkward thing to do. And so as a result, we're going to remove them, but it really didn't change anything, because the only body is still the AACCJC. Because if you remember what I said a year ago to all of you, is that these are broken up by regions. And even if we wanted to petition to WASC for them to accredit us, they would deny us because it's the AACCJC's region, it's their area. We can't go anywhere but there. So you're locked in, and you're locked into this monopoly with this organization, which I think has been proven many times over, acts arbitrarily, unfairly, and has really brought great harm on California's community colleges.
Just very specifically in response to the question. So as I understand it, it has been introduced as a rule change to remove the AACCJC from the rule as the only entity that can accredit. So once that hurdle is removed, it would clear the way for other agencies to try to get clearance from the DOE to compete with the AACCJC for that market. And it is scheduled for a second reading at the Board of Governors meeting that's in January. I was not checking my email, I swear. I was looking up the schedule for the Board of Governors meetings on my phone, and it is January 20th to 21st. And I think that this is a really important issue to sort of break that monopoly. And if people are interested, I know this was at issue in SB 1456, which a lot of you went out to support. And so attending that meeting in Sacramento in January January and expressing your support for this would be another excellent thing to do. So January 20th to 21st in Sacramento is the next time that this will come up.
And while it opens the door, Sarah, there really is no intention by the Board of Governors to modify the ACJC as not being the sole accrediting body. They're really just taking that language out because the state auditor recommended that it was in bad form, and again, they just thought it was not a good idea to have an agency such as them identified in regulation. But it does potentially provide clearance down the road. But for right now, the Board of Governors has shown every indication that they just want to modify this language, but really not look at alternate solutions. My role, I'm going to tell you today, my role being on the league board, I want to make this an absolute priority of ours to look at what options are out there, and why not approach WASC and say, why don't you do what the rest of the nation does? And that's the argument I'm going to bring forth. And hopefully I'll have colleagues that are supporting me, and they are supporting me much more now than they were probably 4 or 5 years ago. But I think that that's going to be one of my big pushes in the coming year.
This one actually is directed to Trustee Rizzo. To John, what are you doing to ensure that our Board of Trustees gets reinstated immediately?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have been. The amazing thing is that even Chancellor Bryce Harris admitted in his deposition that it was probably a mistake to remove the Board of Trustees. And I've been in conversations with him and urging him that it is really best for all involved to get the board reinstated sooner rather than later, we actually are having a milestone this week. We are meeting for the first time in 18 months. It's going to be a training meeting, but we are meeting together as a board on district property, and it will be agendized on Wednesday, and that's a pretty significant meeting, I think. Just because once we're together and acting as a board, regardless of the fact that we don't have our powers back, I think we can act in a way that helps return normalcy to the college. We have our governing board, we're here, and people can come and talk to us about the problems that they see. And I think what we can do as a board now is just take whatever we have, little power or no power we have, but just meet, make the most of our meetings, get the most engaged with the community and with the students, and start acting like a normal board in a normal college. And I think that's the best we can do outside of lobbying Bryce Harris and the Board of Governors to return us soon. He reduced the minimum time from at first he said the soonest the board could have full powers would be a year. He reduced that to 9 months. 9 months is still way too long. There's no reason to have it, especially when half the board are new people, who weren't involved in even if you said the board, caused all these problems, which I don't think is true. But even if that were true, half the people are brand new, and there's no reason to have them elected and sit and do, and not have power. So I think we just have to keep making noise and keep working and keep acting as if we deserve the power that we're due. So.
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, okay, thank you. I just wanted to take the opportunity to point out the importance of recognizing the fact that through a flawed process, a democratically elected board has been removed. And instead of putting it back, they're asking for 9 to 18 months of professional development that is simply not required of other public officials when they're elected. So they've not only removed the board on flawed principles, denied democracy, but then they've put in like this holding pattern of, delaying it longer and longer. And what that means for us right now is that we have one person, one perspective, making all of the decisions of the college in a time of crisis, somebody who has truly extraordinary powers. And this is just simply not the intent of the governance of a college that serves a community. And so I just wanted to make sure that that was pointed out.
Which actually raises another question, and maybe Ms. Eisenberg would like to comment on it. I don't believe anyone has challenged the actions by Chancellor Harris. But it would strike me that there has been an election that's taken place, that new members of the board have been elected, and yet they cannot function because one individual who was not elected made the decision to disband the Board of Trustees. So I'm curious if you think there's any legal arguments that could be pursued.
I want to also point out that the Academic Senate did just pass a resolution directing a letter be written to Bryce Harris pointing this out.
All right.
I would have to research that question before being able to answer it. You know, I think depending on what happens in our lawsuit, that could also affect the timing of the board's re-implementation and the authority of the special trustee to stay in place. So I think it's a complicated legal question that I would be loath to answer without having a little more time to think it through and look at some law. But it's an interesting question.
Good law school question to be researched.
That's right. That's going to be someone's final exam question.
The next question is actually directed for ADA Eisenberg, and that is theories abound as to the real motivation behind the ACCJC's punitive action towards City College. Has your office looked into the real agenda behind the sanctions and attempted closure? It seems the current administration is taking advantage of this crisis to implement significant changes to the structure of the college.
You know, I think it is very difficult to understand. The question that I'm asked most when I'm just talking about this case with my friends and my Uber drivers and people on the street is, well, why are they trying to shut down City College? And it is sort of mind-boggling, and there doesn't seem to be any good answer to that question, right? When you look at the statistics about how wonderful City College does in educating students, and particularly those students who are most in need of its services, and when you look at how critical the college is to the community, I don't think there's anybody in the Bay Area who's more than 1 to 2 degrees separated from somebody who has been to City College and been benefited by City College. So it is, there seems to be no good reason for it, which is what seems to imply that the reason for it is something else, is something about the fact that City College has been so in favor of open access and providing a place for everybody who can benefit from education and opening its doors to everyone who wants to be here and can be here. And the ACCJC has not, and has in fact taken a very different position on these issues. And in the absence of any other rational reason for trying to shut down City College, that seems to be all that's left. And part of our case was to say that the ACCJC should not have been evaluating City College while it was fighting with City College over these exact issues. So will we ever know for sure what is really motivating the ACCJC? Probably not, but I don't see any rational good reason to try to shut down City College.
This next one says, is someone from the State Auditor's Office discussing their findings with the Department of Education and what is happening regarding the ACCJC's recognition by the Department of Education?
I'm sorry.
Is someone from the State Auditor's Office discussing their findings with the Department of Ed and what is happening regarding the ACCJ's recognition by the Department of Ed?
No, but that is a very good suggestion, and we will make sure that that does happen.
This is, says, please make sure the ACCJC's deeds and misdeeds get a thorough evaluation by the U.S. Department of Education. As I understand it, the agency is on notice for several problems right now. There should be these should be highlighted by you and others with findings from the state audit report. I'm sorry, that's the same one we had before. What are you doing to help us pressure, or better yet, move the current pro-ACCJC authoritarian administration and trustee? They behave terribly, forcing out many low-income students and refusing to raise the minimum wage students to San Francisco minimum wage. Anna Fisher.
Anyone want to take that one? I think Chancellor.
Well, I'll just kind of start by talking in more general terms. So I've been in this profession for about 3 decades now. And early in my profession, I was involved with the accrediting activities. I was on a number of self-evaluating teams. And there were 2 directors before Bino. It was Peterson and then Wolf. And it worked. They were very reasonable. Matter of fact, I gave an example. I actually came before the commission when they had their public meeting. It was the meeting before, I think you were denied access. I was at the meeting before that. And actually started talking about some of these stories where, at one point in time I went down to what was known as the College of Oceaneering down in Long Beach. It was a private institution, and it was run by a private individual, yet it was accredited under ACCJC. And when I was doing the governance piece, I realized that he had really no shared governance in place. That he said, I pay all the bills, why would I have this shared governance stuff you're asking of? So I called up David Wolf and said, we kind of have a little problem here. There is no shared governance here, but I said, I think if you give me some time and I sit down and talk with them about how powerful it is to work collaboratively with faculty and staff, that I realize that you're the sole funder of this, but they can provide really good input. And they can actually allow you to make informed decisions because they're in the trenches day in and day out. Let me try this with him. And he says, I think that's a great idea. Now, I can imagine having that conversation with today's leadership. And I went back and I sat down with him, and I said, this is kind of how it is and why it's important and why you should consider engaging this. It was written in our report. It was a recommendation made, and they were given reaffirmation. And then there was a midterm report, which was not uncommon. Remember that back in the days? There was a midterm report, and it allowed you to address the things that were identified by the peer team. He addressed it effectively. He put together a shared governance process, and it worked. And so, what I feel bad about is that I've been attacked. I've been called by a number of the commissioners personally and said, why do you not like accreditation standards? And I said, I don't have any issue with accreditation standards. I just have issues with you because you have little to do with focusing on the quality of education. You focus on basically standards that talk about non-academic matters, like mission statements and planning documents and functional maps, and I'm still trying to figure out that out. I said, you should be focusing on student success factors like degree completion, university transfer, and workforce preparation. And if you look at what you're doing all of those things wonderfully. And these are the arguments I'm making to them. I think they've lost their way. And I've said this to the commissioners when they call me up and challenge me. I love debating, as you could probably see. And when they got off the phone, I could tell I reached them, but then they would go back, and the 19 members would then, reconnect and probably say, I called Ron this week, and they would probably quickly disregard what I said to them. But I was really trying to guide them to being a more friendly, open, reasonable, and really what it's about, it's really peer-to-peer. It's about us being transparent and sharing best practices and being better institutions. This is not a bad institution. Could it improve? Yes. Guess what? We can improve at San Mateo as well. And we've learned a lot of best practices from you, and likewise from us. And that's what accreditation is all about. And personally, that's my goal. What I want to do this year is, we can abolish ACCJC, we can get rid of the commissioners. That may ultimately be the objective. But what I want to have come out of this, what I want, rising from the ashes, is I want, once again, reasonable, peer-to-peer, open, transparent, sharing ideas. Right now, when people write self-reviews, they're so afraid they don't put their dirty laundry in the self-reviews. We used to do that. We were very comfortable. When I was at Foothill Dianza, we would write all the issues that we had, and we would work and use that as a means, that report as a means of redressing these issues. Now, people are fearful of doing that because they don't want to be put on warning or probation, or worse yet, show cause, or maybe even terminated. And this is where I think we have to make a fundamental change, and that's really the objective we have to all strive for in the coming years.
15 more minutes, so we're going to try and run through these questions, and then if any of you have additional questions, you can line up.
Can I add real quick to what he said about the accreditation fears? I also want to point out that adding another lower level restoration to the whole accreditation tier of possibilities makes it much more likely and makes it possible for the ACCJC to use the other sanctions even more freely, because they have yet another one at the bottom that they could throw people into, and I think that's problematic as well.
Well, the standards are different too. One is substantial compliance, and restoration is full compliance. And I don't know how many community colleges across the state are in full compliance all the time. It's just not realistic.
This one says, I cannot understand why the U.S. Department of Education approved restoration status given all the demonstrated conflicts and in this case. This seems outrageous, nor do I understand how a completely new evaluation by some group can be part of a fair process. What's wrong with this picture?
Well, I would just tell you that I've been very disappointed with the engagement by the Department of Education. You know, the standard of reviewing ACCJC, which happens, I believe, every 6 years by DOE, is a standard of reasonableness, which is kind of ironic considering the degree of unreasonableness in their activities relative to City College. We're going to push harder on the Department of Education in this next year. They need to be more engaged. Now, they will tell us that they are limited. And I must tell you, I am disappointed with many federal agencies that we ascribe a certain degree of power and authority, and they basically punt over and over again. I'm thinking of PHMSA, which is the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, which after San Bruno occurred, we expected to really take on the CPUC and make sure there was greater accountability, and they have been fairly lackadaisical about that as well. So it is problematic in many federal agencies, I hate to report, but you have my commitment that we are going to spend a great deal of time trying to educate the Department of Education beyond the individuals within these offices, but going to the Secretary himself and trying to engage him more, even if I have to sit outside his door to talk to him.
I'm really glad that you're saying that about the DOE and keeping the pressure on them to, basically do their job. We have just filed a new complaint to the ACCJC and forwarding that to the DOE as well, and hoping to get responses on what's going on with the continued things I highlighted earlier, basically the inconsistencies in their process that is so problematic, the arbitrariness, and so we hope to be working together on that.
All right, Brian.
CFT 2121 do that.
This one's primarily for Chancellor Galatolo. The ACCJC retained an expensive legal team for the trial. Considering the reasons for the trial in the first place, is San Mateo Community College District or any other community colleges considering not paying any special assessments passed on to the districts?
They have 3 law firms against us. 3!
And you did really well fighting back, Sarah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I have to admit, my board was quite taken back when they saw that all 3 of our colleges were assessed our ratable share of the legal fees to battle the city attorney. The problem is you're in between a rock and a hard place. One of the standards is that you have to maintain positive relationships with the ACCJC, and one of those is paying your bills. If you don't pay your bills, they will sanction you. They will sanction you.
What is the fee that you've been?
I don't know off the top of my head, but it's pretty significant. I did the math after I was done, and it came out to about $400,000. I just did a quick calculation system-wide. Maybe about $400,000, and I think that's just the first of many assessments that they plan to do. The members are going to pay for this, one way or another. They're going to pay for this.
Taxpayers.
Yeah, and just kind of connected to this. So every time they come out and visit, I call it churn. I call it ACCJC churn. That you come out and they have these visits. And these site visits were very rare back in the past. 15 years ago, you wouldn't do that because, first of all, the peers don't have enough time to go out there. But it seems like every organization is getting a site visit. 2 of our 3 colleges, we were reaffirmed, but 2 of our 3 colleges had an immediate follow-up site visit with teams coming out. And you would be amazed at what these issues are for. I mean, it was completely minor issues. I mean, completely insignificant. And actually, one of the team chairs called up and said, I have no idea why a team is coming out to look at this issue. It was about course of records. We had courses that we actually had in our course that we had not used for quite some time, and we did not identify them as being, held in abeyance, that they were part of our current course record. And they were quite upset that we had not separated that. So they wanted to send a team out to make sure that we had identified those 17 courses that we put into kind of a hold status. And what happens then, we get another bill for $26,000 because they come out and they stay overnight, they have dinner, they meet, they fly out. It's become quite insidious, actually.
So you should also know that Assembly Member Phil Ting here in San Francisco, he has, last year he tried to introduce some budget language that would limit the ACCJC's ability to kind of just pass the cost of their legal bills on to the rest of the state. And he has promised to introduce either budget language or legislation during this next year to deal with this issue. So it's on his radar screen, and we're hoping that accreditation and what's going on in ACCJC is going to also be getting more scrutiny at the state level, and it's great to hear it's happening at the federal level now too.
And they won't let me back into the office unless I point out that taxpayer money is not funding the city attorney's side of the case. The way our team functions is that we bring affirmative litigation and we recover money in a lot of those cases. That money under state law is allocated into a special fund that we can only use to fund future affirmative litigation. So we're basically like a plaintiff side law firm that is self-funded. So it is not taxpayer money that funds our affirmative litigation, it is our own recoveries. So it is not taxpayer money that is funding the city attorney. If I hadn't said that.
Could your office inquire about why the $25 million payment from the state of California was delayed in 2012, leading to the false charge that the City College was in a fiscal crisis caused by mismanagement? This is the key issue as it triggered the state takeover.
So very good question, and I'm going to ask Assemblyman Ting to really do some digging into this, because it can happen again. And we need to make sure that the money that is allocated to City College or any of the community colleges is provided in a timely fashion, because you can see how the arbitrariness of ACCJC, if they wanted to come after you, could do so under those circumstances as well. So I will put a call into him to help him do that kind of review.
To the FT, please comment on the status of the FT lawsuit, I guess.
Yes. Currently, right now, it is under appeal. What happened was that the ACCJC had basically made the claim in court that the reason we were suing them had to do with violating their First Amendment rights to basically keep them quiet. And it's a very common sort of legal maneuver to do this. The judge, Judge Cornow at the time, he ruled against the ACCJC. He said that wasn't the purpose of the lawsuit at all. And then they have appealed that, and it is still under appeal. So there has not been a court, though, as far as I understand, all the papers, both sides have been presented on this, and it's just a matter of when a hearing would come about. It's unclear when a hearing date will come about at this point, so that is like on hold until that process occurs.
For Chancellor Galatolo, if a similar panel were held at CSM, similar to this one, would you as Chancellor be present with your administration?
We've actually held 2 similar panels on this issue. Before actually the panel was convened a year ago here, our AFT has taken a very active role in this as well as our administration and frankly our Board of Trustees who put out resolutions. So the answer is of course. I mean, again, we see you as a very important neighbor of ours, and just continue to do the great work that you do. We're very proud of you.
This has a fairly long preamble, and then it says, uncompensated work required for student learning outcomes is not justified. Why are student learning outcomes still being required for accreditation? Is anyone looking into this?
I'm sorry to keep hogging the mic, but this is something I'm pretty passionate about as well, too. So I remember being in the classroom. I don't know about any of you, but I used to call them course objectives. And they were pretty clear. You know, I taught accounting, and at the beginning of the year, I said, you're going to learn debits and credits, you're going to learn accruals and deferrals, you're going to learn the following things, then I would measure it through exams, and sure enough, the exams reflected, did they achieve those outcomes. I think this is just a fancy way of changing up what we've been doing all along, and I think we've survived quite well in the state for the last couple hundred years doing this too. But I find it very difficult to understand why, you know, student learning outcomes are given the creeds that they're given, because there's really been no study in the last 20 years that's shown the effectiveness of those. I haven't seen one study. There was one actually. There was one study done about 12 years ago, I want to say at the University of Texas in Austin, and it was a very poor study, and it wasn't really statistically relevant the way it was performed. And that's the only real meaningful data I've seen on student learning outcomes. And it continues to be a driving force for all of us, yet there's nothing that supports why it makes a difference in teaching and learning. I personally don't believe it. I think that we need to understand that the way we did things in the past, I think, worked well, and why change that?
This one says, what do you think of Mayor Edley's proposal to develop housing on Balboa reservoirs? I believe this illustrates why the mayor has been so silent on the CCSF case. He looks at the transactions real estate, not backbone of San Francisco.
We want to make sure that the reservoir and the property of the school is used for the students at the school. And actually, the voters in San Francisco, they voted to have a performing arts and education center. And we want to make sure that the money is used for the purposes of what the voters wanted. And that should be the primary thing. So we hope, and I don't know all the details of this, so I don't want to get too much into the details of it, but anything that is a violation of what the voters want by some arbitrary folks, special trustees, ACCJ dominated, we want to make sure that that does not occur. We want to make sure that these decisions are made, again, by our elected officials, the Board of Trustees. We hope they get back their power so we can have them running the show. And also any bond measures that were passed. If the voters voted for it, you have to respect the will of the voters. That's the law, and that's what should happen. And so any kind of other plan to try to, you know, take it away or not do what the voters wanted, we will resist.
So my response to that is that I will have a conversation with Mayor Lee about that, and also with the but before moving on, I want Chancellor Galatolo to talk about an extraordinary program that he undertook at one of the campuses, or two of the campuses of the College of San Mateo and the community colleges of San Mateo, and how he's created housing for faculty and staff in a very tight market, and has also actually made some money in doing so.
Well, are you familiar with our faculty and staff housing program that we have at our three colleges? No. So when I became chancellor about 15 years ago, one thing that was very apparent to me, and let's just talk about numbers for a minute. Living in San Mateo County, like San Francisco County, is very expensive. At the time, in the mid-70s, the ratio of a faculty salary to a home was 3 to 1. We actually hired our faculty back in the mid-70s around $15,000 a year, and a home was about $45,000 at that same time, so it was about 3 to 1. Now we're bringing on our new faculty anywhere between $50,000 and $70,000. Yet a new home, the average home price in San Mateo County is well above $900,000. That's the average home. Now we all know that they're all well into the 7 figures. So what I realized is that my faculty and staff, they would come to us. They would commute from as far away as Stockton every day, as far away as Petaluma. They're driving right past you to come to our college, and as far as Morgan Hill. And what we were doing is, we have a sense of family at our institution as well, and we were really taking our faculty and staff, frankly, away from our family. They were spending hours commuting to and from work every single day. And so while there's nothing I could do about that commute, we didn't have enough helicopters to send them back and forth, we realized that one thing that the single greatest expense that we all have is the cost of housing, and that's what costs them to live in these places further away from the Bay Area. So what I wanted to do to address that issue, to retain them and attract new faculty as well, was we launched faculty and staff housing. The first we did was about maybe 11, 12 years ago at College of San Mateo. And it was really interesting. A person that I really have a great deal of respect for, the former county counsel, Tom Casey. When we were cutting the ribbon, he actually came and whispered in my ear as we were going through this regalia. He goes, "Ron, I've been in this county for 30 years, and I can't tell you how many people talked about this." He goes, "You actually did it." He goes, "I remember you telling me about this because we did the legal information for you." He says, "But you actually did it." And I said, "Well, of course we did it. We're going to do more of it." So we actually did a second phase at Kenyatta College. We built 60 units at Kenyatta College, and we're actually in the process of looking at doing the same at Skyline College. And what that's allowed us to do is to have our faculty live on the campus and work. And you can imagine also the savings in terms of fuel and all the factors on that and carbon footprint. But it allowed our faculty and staff to be closer to the family, closer to work. It really worked out quite well for all of them. And then, combined with that, I created this non-interest-bearing loan program. Because if you just live on the campus, you never get a chance to get off campus and buy a home in the area. It failed as well. So we have this non-interest-bearing loan program, upwards of $75,000, where you save living in these apartment complexes, which are beautiful, for about 6 or 7 years. That combined with a $75,000 down payment would go towards purchasing a condominium or a townhome or a home. And we've had a number of faculty that have actually gone through this program over the last several years. And so what we've done is we've actually moved our faculty back closer to where they work. And it can work. This program can work. It just requires commitment, it requires dedication, and it requires an understanding that people just need help for that down payment. Many of them can make the mortgage. They just can't come up with that $150,000 or $200,000 for a down payment, and this has allowed them to do that.
So, but what you failed to mention was that the rents that are being charged are 50% of the market.
Yeah, 50%.
Which gives the faculty members the opportunity to save that money for a down payment, and you're also still making money every year, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our goal is to break even. The money we take, we put into reserve for replacing roofs, painting the buildings, and stuff like that. But that's an initiative that really is to address the broader needs of our faculty and staff, because, again, the single greatest expense they have, I can only pay them so much in COLA, but I can affect the expenditure side of the equation by basically making it easier for them to pay their rent and or their mortgage. Yeah, we did, and we used a debt instrument that's very commonly used, certificates of participation, very low interest rates that allowed us to do this. And by the way, we were able to do this because we own the property. We don't have to pay property taxes. We got that ruling. And then we got very low debt on this. So that's why we're able to offer these beautiful apartments at about 50% standard, and at the same time allow them to save money for down payment. The goal is to get them into a home in close proximity to where they work.
So besides the Performing Arts Center, you may want to look at this model for housing for faculty. It's a very exciting program, and I visited this year actually. Beautiful townhouses, aren't they?
I want to live there.
So really a phenomenal opportunity. So with that, I think that's going to bring to a close our forum this morning. I want to thank again all of the participants on the panel. They did an outstanding job. I want to thank all of you for your participation. And not unlike the last one of these that we had, I leave with a list of to-dos at your request. That will keep me busy for the rest of the new year. So again, thank you for your participation, and we're going to fix this.